Okay, so we have an official debate happening. We have Return of the Jester, we have Arco. For this debate, Return of the Jester has taken the position that all cops are not bad. Specifically, majority of white cops aren't bad. Arcowhip has taken the opposition. As always, when it will be based upon who concedes. We don't get a vocal concession from either participant. We'll put it to a voting poll in which you, the audience, can decide on who you think performed better overall in the debate. No time limit, medium moderation. You guys can get started.
Thanks everyone for coming to listen to the debate, and thanks Jester for agreeing to debate this topic. I'd like to start off by talking about the phrase, all cops are bad, because I see this proposition that Jester made as a negation of that idiom, all cops are bad. First, I want to say that if you were to read the phrase, all cops are bad, literally, and then to negate that claim literally, you are misrepresenting what the slogan is referring to. All cops are bad is an idiom where the meaning is not deduced by the internal meaning of individual words. The saying as a whole is where the meaning is conveyed. We see examples of this type of symbolic speech with other phrases such as spill the beans. Obviously, you're not spilling the beans, you're revealing a secret. We don't get the meaning of revealing a secret by analyzing the individual terms of that phrase. We just learn the meaning of spill the beans to refer to reveal a secret. Or for example, the political slogan from the Vietnam War, hey, hey, LBJ, how many kids have you killed today? Obviously, no one is claiming that Lyndon B. Johnson flew to Vietnam and murdered children with his bare hands. It's evoking something else. It's referring to something else, referring to policies where innocent children were being killed and LGBT continuing those policies. So,
all right. So
I'm not done with my opening statement yet.
Sorry.
So, with political statements, there is a sense of hyperbole that's present. The meaning of the statements is to refer to something. It's referring to some kind of it's referring to something other than individuals, but it's referring to a culture. And there's a history with the term ACAB. The history is part of this meaning. Originally, the phrase was all coppers are bastards, and the bastard part is key. Bastard here is referring to a type of corruption or a bastardization, and the phrase refers to the idea that humans who participate in the work policing the public for the powerful's interest corrupts man. What corrupts police is this culture, this commonplace culture, where they have shared beliefs, values, signs, and actions, and specifically those beliefs that are not shared by the society at large, but only in the police community itself. And one of those examples of this belief is qualified immunity. Qualified immunity prevents police officers from being sued for violating civil rights. It has its history in a court case from the height of the civil rights era in 1967 called Pearson v. Ray. The precedent set by this case is that officers are not allowed to be sued for the improper performance of their duties as police officers. What resulted from such a precedent has been a culture of cops not being held accountable for their failures and duties. And because of this immunity, justice has not been served against police who acted repugnantly. This is a legal precedent that exemplifies part of the common culture in the police force that bastardizes. That, namely, that being a brotherhood of police who don't snitch on each other, who turn blind eyes to bad behavior, who themselves take part in violent acts because they know the consequences won't be meaningful. So when a political slogan is chanted, what is being attacked is not individuals, but a common culture that bastardizes. And here I want to explain a little bit what a common culture is. As the philosopher Kwame Appiah puts it, a common culture is that which everyone knows, shares certain beliefs, values, and actions, and signs that are known to be widely held. It is not just that individuals all have this belief, but that it is seen that the community holds this belief. So it is not attacking individuals, but the community view. We can see this type of knowing being manifested to the demands to defund police, the demands to teach police de-escalation training and to change to community enforcement. This is also demonstrated by the push in Congress to pass legislation to combat police policies such as qualified immunity. Booker recently submitted a bill that would do this very thing, and there is current discussion in Congress about what ought not to be included in such a bill. So we have good reasons to believe that there is a common culture in the police community that bastardizes to such a degree that it requires federal legislation. So the phrase "all cops are bad" is not referring to individuals, but to a community culture. And secondly, we have evidence of this community culture needing to be addressed in our life today. And to refer back to the proposition, Jester was saying that not all cops are bad, and specifically white cops are not bad. This is a conjunction. In order for that to be proven true, both of those aspects need to be shown to be the case. If I negate one of these aspects, then the proposition should go to me. And in this case, I have listed out some standards that need to be addressed by my opponent. One, that we must read "all cops are bad" literally, and two, that such a culture does not exist.
All right. So, in response to you saying that ACAB isn't literally saying that all cops are bad, when most people say ACAB or ACOP, they are majority referring to almost all cops. I know this because from personal experience, I was in a different Discord server, and I told them I don't think all white cops are bad. I don't think it's about race. That I don't think it's about race of cops being bad. I think there's more behind in that. And they just started calling all cops bastards, and that specifically white cops are bad and the law system's failing and all these other things, which is clearly against all cops. Because if you talk about a community, you talk about people, the individuals in that community as well. If someone were to say, hey, all Americans are racist or all Americans hate each other, they're referring to every individual because they're saying every individual. They're saying that whole community, right? And so I think that's very important. Even if it's not literal, the way people use it can be used in a more literal manner than saying it. Because as much as I want to say, oh, I spilled the beans, yeah, sometimes people actually spill the beans in a literal manner. So that's very important to think about. And about the common culture, I think I agree, and I think that should be addressed. But that happens pretty much everywhere. To specifically talk about it with cops is somewhat hypocritical, because if you think about it, in every community there will be a common, ground everyone agrees on, some unspoken rules and such like that. In the black community, there is unsaid rules of don't snitch, at least in the hoods. In the hood, you don't want to, snitch on anybody, otherwise you'll get stabbed or in prison. Same thing goes, don't snitch, right? So, but that doesn't mean everybody the hood in the hood or in prison actually goes by the community culture or those specific unsaid rules, because people still snitch. It still happens, whether that be on the streets or in prison. Happens every day. So for you to generalize all comps and say all comps must be, or vast majority of comps must be partaking in bastardous acts because of the culture that they have in their community is, in my opinion, wrong. Um, and I think generalizing by race is same thing as being racist in and of itself. So if you want to call cops bad because they're doing some racist acts, there has to be a non-racist reason behind it, or you have to be able to justify it with non-racist reasoning. But saying all white cops, specifically mainly white cops, is racist. Just like if I said majority of black people or all black people do pretty much anything, that would be considered racist. And I would get a lot of flack for that. But if I said that about cops, like all white cops do this, then I wouldn't get nearly as much flack.
Cool. Is that the end of your opening statements?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So now that the opening statements are over, we can have a little bit more back and forth about what we were saying. So first, I'd like to go over the all usage here. So in your response to my claim that all is referring to a community rather than individuals, you said, from your experience, every person you meet is referring to literal individuals being bad. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so why should I accept that because you have encountered some people who make that claim, that the only meaning of all cops are bad is your experience?
I would say that you could accept that because I'm talking to people who generally share a similar opinion to, well, not most others, but share an opinion that if you just said randomly in most discords or in real life, even most people would agree with it because they have an opinion that most people would agree with. So I would use them to represent the majority.
Your claim is it's by popularity. So ad populum here.
Yeah. Yes, we can go by that.
Okay, right. So have you spoken to every person who uses the term?
Not every person, no.
Right. So how many people have you spoken to that use the term all cops are bad and have represented that view? Like if you were to estimate that you've spoken one-on-one with.
I'd estimate about 17.
17. Okay. Now, do you know how many people around the world use all cops are bad?
Likely millions.
Millions. Okay, so 17 out of a million, that's a very small sample size. Would you agree?
Yes, I would agree.
Okay, so I think that if your sample size is 17, and that's the evidence for why I should accept your view of the idiom out of millions, I don't see that as good enough reason to accept it. Now, from my point of view, these idioms are not literal. They never have been literal. When we make a political slogan, the rhetorical strategy is meant to be controversial. It's meant to get people thinking about something and using the term, but it is never meant to be literal. So to assume that there's this literal viewing because some people are misapplying an idiom doesn't seem to me like a good argument against my claim. There's a few things you have to negate in my claim. One, you have to negate that political slogans traditionally are literal. The other one is that all cops are bad is one of those slogans that's literal. And your evidence is that there are people you've spoken to who have that view that it means all of them. And we've just gone through that that's very underdetermined. So do you have a different argument for that?
All right. So, nope. No, I really don't have a different argument for that. But when you
so
brought
do you
up,
concede the point that all cops are bad is a poetic term, a poetic sentence that isn't literal?
yes, I can see that, but I still
Well,
yes,
not can see, but do you concede? I mean, do you grant it? Do you accept
yeah,
it?
I concede it.
Okay, cool. So from that point of view, we both agree then that the phrase is a broad phrase and it's referring more to this community view. So then we can go on to the next thing, where you talked about the common culture. You said that what I claimed happens in the police culture is actually happening in all cultures, like not snitching. And you pointed out that happens in prisons, and it happens in some subsets of the Black community where there's this standard of don't snitch. Snitches get stitches is a phrase, a common phrase you might hear. Am I representing your claims correctly so far?
Yes, you are so far.
Okay, cool. And you said for me to point out that, for me to say that cops do this is hypocritical when other communities are doing the same principle here about not snitching, correct?
Yes, not snitching and various other things. As I said, every community has their own common unsaid and unspoken rules.
Right. So I just want to be clear what the claim is. So my claim is not that only police have unspoken and common or cultural rules and beliefs. My claim is that the police force have a set of beliefs that are different than society at large.
I would argue that although they have some differences, because they have different jobs, different lives, everything of that sort.
Right.
I think some of it's still the same. Because if you've ever had a really good friend, you don't tell on that friend or get them in trouble. When you're going to school, right? Your friend, let's say he does something at lunch, you won't go and immediately go tell on him because he's your friend. It's an unsaid rule. That's a culture between friends from one person to another. So, and the
Sure.
cops, they have that too. So it
Yeah,
makes
yeah.
so much
So,
sense.
right. So there's an analogy there where people are protecting their friends or protecting someone in their group, right? But there's a symmetry breaker between those two examples. And that has to do with the duties that these different cultures have. So when you're not snitching on your friend, you're performing a duty for the sake of your friend. You're protecting your friend. Now, in the police force, your duty is to protect and serve the community. And when you don't tell on your friend who violated protecting and serving the community, you're failing your duties. The symmetry breaker here being that your obligation is not just to your friend, but to the community because you volunteered for the role of police officer. So they're not analogous in that sense.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. That yeah, they have different duties between just a normal everyday citizen and a police officer, obviously. But that doesn't change. Well, that does change some things, but I still think I still think that it still runs in the same vein because with someone because failing the community and protecting them, that does weigh pretty heavily. So I'd say majority of people probably wouldn't, forsake their duties to the whole entire community over some friends or something of sort like that.
Right,
So
but we
that
see
could
that
go to
happening. We see that happening in the police. They forsake their duty for their community in order to protect their friends. And this happens over and over and over again. There's a Supreme Court case justifying it. It happens in court systems all around the country to the point that the public is demanding this change. And we're like getting federal legislation now because of it. So it's not some kind of hidden thing.
but I'd like to say that with every group, the part that is highlighted the most, or well, yeah, the part that's highlighted the most is usually the bad part. So the cops, some of them are forsaking duty, but I would like to think most wouldn't do that. But it's the bad ones that are getting the most attention because you have to give the most attention to the bad people, right? Because cops, let's give an example that's literally in their job play. They have to put more attention towards capturing criminals than they do having to deal and help out actual citizens. So the criminals, even though they're worse off, they get more attention. Whereas the citizens, they get less attention, even though they are generally better and they're contributing more. That's an example of the bad part of a community or a bad part of, anything really being highlighted more than the good part.
So, but that's not really a response to what I was saying. Like, do you remember what I said?
Go ahead and repeat yourself, just so that way I have it clear.
Well, I was saying that there's this failure of duties that the police are doing. They're forsaking their responsibility to the community in order to protect people who are violating the community. And then you were pointing out, well, everyone is going to latch on and exaggerate the badness of an individual. But that doesn't address my claim, unless you're trying to say that this community view is this other type of exaggeration.
I was trying to say in response to your claim that even though all those laws are being passed, doesn't mean that majority of cops are, being wrong for taking their duties, all these other things. I'm saying they may very well still be the minority, but they're being blown up and exaggerated and having the more response to them rather than the good cops.
Right. Well, so this is going back to like the literal view here. You're taking bad to refer to just the people who are murdering, or just the people who are being brutal, these bad apples. But whenever the phrase all cops are bastards is evoked, it's not referring to bad apples. It's referring to bad apples being supported, being protected, being immune. And that requires the community to share this belief. So pointing out that there are bad apples and pointing out that the bad apples are going to be picked up by the media and over exaggerated isn't responding to the claim I'm making. The claim I'm making is that the bad apples exist because the shared beliefs in the police force are bastardizing those who would be good and enabling them to support the bad apples.
I think cops aren't being bastardized by the situation because
No, the beliefs. It's not the situation, it's the beliefs.
The beliefs, okay.
Yeah.
They're not being bastardized by each other's beliefs and the community culture, right? Because no matter, a community culture can't change a person's fundamental personality, right? At a base level,
we disagree there.
At a base level, I think that there's a bottom line you won't go past. And that's because of your personality. If you're a really good person, your bottom line that you won't go past will be higher. If you're a bad person, or you're more selfish or something, the bottom line that you won't go past is lower. So the community is appealing to the ones that are bad because their bar is lower. So of course they're going to do things worse. But they're not
Which community are you
lowering the
talking
bar for
about,
the
right?
good people.
Which community are you talking about right now?
I'm talking about for like the cops that do engage in the community culture that you said and do bad things, the bad apples as you called them.
Well, yeah, I was just using that term to refer to your claim because you were saying that it's like bad apples, and then that makes other people think the whole police force is corrupt. But I was saying that all cops are bad is negating the idea that it's just a few bad apples. The point is that the bad apples are supported and protected. So the actions of the bad apple are enabled by the community's beliefs. And you made the claim that beliefs are not motivators for actions. But this is where you and I disagree. You said something like someone's natural personality will determine what they're going to do and they won't cross that line. But I think personality is all beliefs. So I don't want to derail too much, but I can give you an example of why beliefs are motivators for actions rather than there being some type of natural personality. We can look at feral children, and feral children who were raised by dogs. They don't act like humans do. They don't have the same norms they conform to. They don't have the same ideas about the world. They don't even have language in those cases. They behave like dogs. They run like dogs on four legs. They eat the food dogs eat. They seek affection in the same way dogs do. If humans had a natural personality like you're talking about, then those humans would not look like dogs. They would look like humans with personalities that we see in society. We don't see that to be the case. We see the human adapt the types of behaviors of the community they're in, whether it be dogs or it be people that lock them up in a basement and tie them in a straitjacket for their whole lives. In both of those types of cases, their personality is nothing natural but externally conditioned. So the beliefs are motivating the action and informing someone about their identity in the first place.
Going back to your example, I'm not going to try to go too off rail, but going back to your example, feral children, right? There's a difference between a grown man who has had time to form his own personality, time to form his own beliefs, right? And a small child who hasn't really had nearly as much time to form that. Because when you're a child, you develop more, and that is shown that you develop more based on your surroundings. But when you're an adult, you're gonna develop based on your surroundings to an extent, but you won't be able to fully just change because of your surroundings. So going into a community where everyone's just, having each other's back, doing bastardous acts, and just being terrible people in general, that won't turn you into a terrible person. Maybe it might happen, years down the line or something of the sort, but that's not.
Right. But so
Yeah.
there's a few things there. When you say it doesn't turn you into a terrible person, you're misrepresenting all cops are bad again, because the statement is not referring to all cops are terrible people who do these vicious, brutal acts. It's referring to corrupting the spirit of the police. It's referring to the community there that is supporting the bad apples who do these terrible things and protects them. That's what's being referred to by the statement. So when you appeal to terrible police officers, you're misrepresenting the statement. Now, the other thing you said is there's a difference between an adult and a child. But the feral child, you said, so as you said correctly, the children learn the majority of what they're going to learn in their life at a young age, like language, for example. There's a prime time for language acquisition between the ages of 4 and 7. And that's where we get more of the advanced grammar that we use in our language. Before that, it's a much simpler form of language. And of course, like, the boundaries aren't very strict. But the point being, feral children who are found after the age of 7, who become adults, are incapable of learning a language that would have these advanced grammatical rules. At best, their language is similar to like a chimpanzee who learns sign language, where they have object representation. They can say things like hungry, orange, or Arco, mad. Very simple, very, very simple, what's called ostensive language, where it's referring to objects in space, or internal experiences that they learn as like, this represents this feeling, something like that. So all that does is support my argument in the first place, which is the adult had the beliefs given to them at a young age that made it, gave them the ability to reflect on their actions and their beliefs and the motivations for what they do. So there is no natural personality that comes out. There's just the natural ability to learn these languages and beliefs and learn the rules and follow the rules in a society. And all cops are bad is pointing out that there are rules in the police force that are unjust, and these rules result in those participating doing corrupt things or bastardized things or bad things. Not bad apple bad, but allowing bad apples to do bad or protecting bad apples from doing bad. That's what bad is referring to in that statement. It's not referring to all cops are the people who murdered George Floyd.
All right. So I just said that this is my exact position. All cops are not bad. Specifically, majority of white cops aren't bad. So, yes, there may be people supporting bad cops, that bad apples may be supported, ACAB may be someone correcting that stance. You're claiming that's what ACAB believes, that the bad apples are being supported, correct?
That's part of it. It's not the totality, but that's part of it.
All right. So that's understandable, of course. But I'm not saying that the bad apples aren't supported. I'm saying that the majority of cops, or specifically the majority of white cops, aren't bad, and that they're being misrepresented as bad due to the bad cops or the bad apples in the bunch who, have the saying ACAB that applies to them. So the ones that are being supported and are bad and are committing bad acts are being used to represent, I'd say, a lot of majority of cops. And majority of white cops are being called bad, even though they haven't necessarily done anything themselves.
Right. My point is that you're straw manning all cops are bad with your proposition. You're misrepresenting what all cops are bad is evoking.
Oh, I didn't say that I didn't say that ACAB or the saying ACAB was saying that all cops are bad. I'm saying that just in general, when people talk about cops and with just the current political climate, that majority of cops are being seen as bad, specifically white cops, even if they haven't done anything, even if they aren't corrupt or they're not being supported, they are still being seen as bad.
Right, which just supports my argument about the community view of what's wrong with the police. So it's not relevant if it is true or false that police are like these bad people. What's relevant is that people view the police as holding those beliefs and values to such a degree that they do not trust that the killing was justified. Because these things have happened over and over and over again, and the perception of the police force is evoking this notion that police have these corrupt values and beliefs that are motivating their action, that's in support of my argument about them having a distinct culture.
I'm pretty sure I already conceded and said that they do have a distinct culture, as does everybody in pretty much every community.
But it's supporting not just that they have a distinct culture, but that they have a distinct culture that has this bad part.
Okay, so about them having a distinct culture which has a bad part, in your words, of course, the community view of them is extremely untrusting because of said culture that you referenced, that the general culture is supposed to be bad in the police force. That's the opinion of most of the masses right now, I'd like to say. And that doesn't, mean that it's true. So a lot of people can claim that there was this culture. For example, let's in Nazi Germany, I'd say a good amount of people actually supported Hitler and thought that the Jews are responsible for, everything that happened to the country, and they just hated Jews and wanted to kill them all, right? They weren't necessarily correct. It wasn't necessarily all the Jews' fault.
That's not true. That's not true. So many people in Germany had racist notions. Many people in Germany might have been sympathetic to having like an ethno-state, but not everyone wanted to kill the Jews simply for being a different race. Even those people who were racist found the Holocaust morally repugnant and condemned Hitler for what he did. There's an entire philosophy in studying this history in Germany where the translation is dealing with the past, where they're talking about these things like, how could the German people allow this to happen? And they go into these beliefs and things like that, and the apathy. But what is not clear, which seemed to be what you were saying, is that the German people as a whole wanted to kill Jewish people.
I was using an example to say that even if the majority of people think something to be true, that doesn't necessarily make it true. So the comps, they may not actually have this community, as you say. Like, they may have a community which is somewhat negative, but not nearly as negative as you're putting it out to be. So even though the masses or majority of people use ACAB and other things like that, believe it to be as such may not be the case.
Well, of course. So just because a community holds a belief to be true doesn't necessarily mean that belief is true. I agree with that. This is where the qualified immunity that is a precedent in our legal system is important. This is going back to that court case, the Supreme Court case in 1967, Pearson v. Ray. Now, let me just give you a little bit of background about that court case. There were something like 13 pastors who were going to a bus stop in Mississippi. They went into a diner or something like that to get some coffee. And there were 3 pastors in that group that were black. The police officers there told them they couldn't go to that restaurant. And the pastors were like, no, we can go to this restaurant. There's no good reason for us. You're invoking this law unjustly. So we're going to sit here and eat. So then the police officers used some kind of Mississippi law about like unlawful gathering or something, and they arrested them. So this went to the Supreme Court because the 3 pastors who were black were suing for violation of their civil liberties. The Supreme Court said that you cannot sue this police officer for performing their duties, starting this precedent of qualified immunity. This was done at the height of the civil rights movement. There was a lot of motivation there for these officers to do something because of racial discrimination. It was done unjustly, but it was supported by the legal system. That same precedent in the Supreme Court is being used today by police officers in the court systems. Many people who killed innocent civilians unjustly are getting away with these things without any accountability. So when people say all cops are bad, they're referring to the lack of accountability in the justice system and the culture in the police department that is perpetuating these things. They're not referring to individuals who are doing these acts. They're referring to the system, the culture, the beliefs, the values, the symbols that go into this. They're saying that's corrupting, that's bad. Bad here meaning that it's like harming something like our humanity or their humanity. And that leads to physical harm and death in some cases.
Is that it?
Yeah.
All right, cool. So when it comes to how corrupt it is that the cops can do certain things like physical harm, death to people and get away with it just because of that law and the way the Supreme Court operates.
It's not just because of the law, but carry on.
Because of the law, how the Supreme Court operates, the community culture, many other things. Well, yes, that is bad, but at the same time, I feel like it's somewhat blown out of proportion, should I say. Because there is corruption there. I'm not saying there isn't. And I'm saying that I'm sure it's not like every single day there's like tens of people just getting pardoned because of that law, just right off the bat, you know what I mean? Like, I'm sure it happens not maybe every day, maybe every week or so, but it's not nearly as serious as it is said because it very rarely results in death or, well, it may result in some physical harm, but not to the point, at least not to the point of death, because this is back before even now, right? Now, the civil rights movement is kicking up especially strong right now. But in 2016, 234 blacks were killed by police, right? And that was out of the 652,936 cops operating around the U.S., according to Statistica.com, right? So that is an extremely small amount for the amount of cops to murdered blanks ratio. And overall, by the way, from all minorities, all ethnic groups, it was 600 or so people who were murdered. But for that ratio of amount of cops to murders shows just how probably uncommon for it to get to such a point where it has to be, pardoned by the law because they killed someone.
I don't understand your claim. So you're saying that there was only something like 200 black men killed by police, and there were 6,000 people killed by police in total?
No, there's 600 police killed by. There's 600 people killed by police total, and that was out of the 600,000 cops operating around the U.S. at the time.
But what is the relevance of that? Because the claim is not that police officers are killing thousands and thousands and thousands of black people. The claim is that there's a set of beliefs and values in the police culture that is leading to a corruption of their duties as police officers. So even if there were no deaths at all by police officers, the claim would still stand. Pointing out the number of deaths isn't addressing the claim. Because I'm not just concerned, and people who you say ACAB are not just concerned with deaths. They're also concerned with police brutality. They're also concerned with police lying. They're concerned about the police representing the interests of the ruling class rather than the interests of the community. So the deaths is not addressing all of those things that are baked into the notion of all cops are bad.
The point I was trying to get across is that when it comes to the corruption, which ACAB is referring to the corruption and how the cops are catering to the upper class and are allowed to do things and get off because of the law and just the social climate in general. Correct? Is that what you're saying?
Sorry, say that again.
That ACAB is saying that the cops have a corrupt social climate which allows them to get away with things that they shouldn't be able to get away with. That's what ACAB is basically saying.
It's not just social climate. So the point of it being the community, the law is exemplifying the community beliefs and values that are shared.
All right, what I was trying to say in response to that is that that it's not nearly as corrupt as it's made out to be, or that it very rarely gets to the point where they have to actually pardon someone for a murder, which I would say is the height of corruption at that point, is pardoning someone for a wrongful murder.
That's where you and I disagree. As I said, you can take away all the murders and ACAB would still be true. It is not contingent on murder alone. The murder is a symptom of ACAB.
I was using murder as an example of the highest form of corruption that could be reached.
Corruption of what?
Corruption of just overall, duty and law, because allowing someone to get off for killing another person wrongfully is extremely corrupt, especially if it's only reserved to a certain, group of people, right?
Right. So the corruption there is not just the killing, but the protection of the killer, the obstruction of justice for the people. That's the corrupt part.
Which is exactly what I said.
You were pointing out the consequence of death being the corrupt part, but that I want to make it clear that the corrupting element in the community are all of those things, not just the consequence of the death, although the consequence of the death is very bad. And it might be the greatest moral wrong that occurred, but that's different than the corruption that's happening because of the beliefs the officers hold. So when we say all cops are bad, we're referring to that shared belief that allows for that tragedy to occur. The tragedy occurring is a symptom of ACAB.
All right. So I guess we can agree that it is a symptom of ACAB, the murders, of course. But how does that relate to majority of white cops specifically being bad? Or, well, yeah, that was my exact majority of
Right.
white
Well,
cops.
as I said at the beginning of the debate, I only need to negate one of the parts of your proposition, which is the first part, where you said not all cops are bad. So if I've shown that all cops are bad, then we don't even need to get into the race element.
Saying that a certain system is corrupt isn't the same as saying that it is bad, because it's
This
made
is
up
what
of.
we went over at the very beginning. ACAB is a hyperbolic and symbolic idiom. So it is not referring to the literal meaning of the words inside the statement. You could think of all cops as a synonym for the community. You could think of bad as a synonym for corruption. Something like that. Bastardization. So what happens is people hear ACAB and they misrepresent what's being referred to.
All right, then I would argue that since we're instead of putting all cops, we're going to put community. Instead of bad, we're going to put corrupt.
The community is corrupt by these values
corrupt.
and beliefs.
Yes. All right, we can go with that.
Right. So even though the community has individuals in it, a community being made up of individuals, talking about a shared value in a community does not then mean every individual participating has those identical values. By participating in the community, they support those values implicitly. They don't have to be explicit. That's why the demand for reform is in place. The demand for de-escalation training is in place. For example, you pointed out that in the very beginning, your opening statement, that the police officer's job is to deal with criminals. Okay, fair enough. But do you know the percentage of calls that the police are responding to that are actual criminal calls and in contrast are mental health crises? Like, do you know that ratio?
No, I don't know the exact ratio.
What would you expect it to be? Like the amount of criminal calls police respond to versus the amount of mental health crises police respond
to? I'd say there's much more mental health crises than criminal.
Okay, great. So you agree that the police are responding to mental health crises more than criminal, but you said that their job is to respond to criminal things that are happening. So
the thing is,
with that being said, okay, go ahead.
Okay, but the thing is, though, calls aren't the only thing, because there are going to be cops patrolling, looking for cops. There's cops going out doing warrants. There's cops going out and doing raids. Calls aren't the only part of being a cop. You can call and say something's wrong.
Oh yeah, of course. I'm not.
But of course,
I'm not saying that the calls are the only thing, but the police are reactive. They're a reactive part of our culture. They're supposed to respond to things that are happening. So the majority of their responses are for people who are in mental health crises, not for criminal activities. And of course, there's a role for the police to enforce the law of criminal activities. But the amount of work that they're doing for these mental health crises is way higher than for the criminal responses. And the problem with that is they're treating mental health crises as criminal events. So they go up to someone who's in psychosis and they treat them like a criminal. They think, oh, this person must be on drugs. They slam them into the car. They treat them brutally. That's an example of the beliefs about being a police officer and about the people they're responding to that is evidence for ACAB. Jester. Jester.
He might have got disconnected. I'll ping him in debate chat.
Okay. Maybe something came up in his life that he had to respond to. Can't whistle that well.
Well, Icy's thinking of hosting a whistling workshop.
Sorry about that.
No
No
worries.
worries. No worries. It's all good.
Would you mind repeating the last little bit you said?
I gotta remember now. I think it was something about mental health responses. So,
they respond more to mental health than they do to crime.
Yeah, not only that, when they see someone in a mental health crisis, they're treating it like a criminal act. They treat someone who's mentally ill as a criminal because they have this belief that they're supposed to be responding to crime. So they're entering situations already in the mindset of like, this is a crime in process. That's one of those beliefs that's corrupting.
I would argue that that's not an issue of corruption, that's an issue of training. They don't have enough training, not that they're corrupt, but that they don't have enough training. So yes, maybe we need to train them more, right? I can concede on that point. But
right, but that's when I say corruption, that's what I mean. The training, the beliefs and values they're given are one of those things that's corrupting them. So I'm not using corrupt here to mean like they're doing backroom deals in wine cellars to try and get some advantage with a politician or something like that. I mean that they're corrupting their own actions because of those beliefs, their own values, their own duties. Corruption is more about the character of the person performing those duties.
Well, going back to what you said about how they respond more to mental health issues than they do respond to, anything else, such as crimes, I would say I think that's likely incorrect because a lot of the time, they have to do things like all the other things I said, all the raids, all the warrants they have to go after, all the people they arrest, right? Those things have nothing to do with calls. So yes, they may answer more calls about mental health than they do about criminals, but that has nothing to do with them necessarily going more for mental health people than criminals. Because at the end of the day, you call in for a mental health person, yeah, a cop's gonna come, but there's probably two other cops going to do a raid, or there's probably two other cops going out for a warrant, something like that.
Wait, so your claim is so first you agreed that the majority of responses are for people with mental health, and now you're saying no, they're not responding to mental health. They're actually
I'm
responding
saying
to more criminal acts. I don't
I'm
understand
saying
your claim.
I'm claiming that they respond more to criminal acts than they do respond. Yeah, I'm claiming they respond more to criminal acts than they do to mental health, because, like I said, I agreed with you when I said that yes, there are more calls made for mental health, and they respond to more calls for mental health, right? But afterwards, I said that there's many other things they do that involve criminals rather than mental health.
Okay, yeah, but that's not the claim. Like, of course, cops are responding to criminal activity. I'm not saying they aren't. The point here is that they're responding to people with mental health issues as criminals because of the culture of being a police officer. That's why they need this additional training. That's why we need to move to a community view of law enforcement.
But, right? But yes, they may need more training, but I still think that doesn't prove that they're corrupt. Because you can see the most corrupt forces in the world, they can still have the best training. Because some military, some police around the world are extremely corrupt. If they still have, good training, they still be able to handle a situation just fine. But they're
What do you
corrupt
mean by corrupt?
nonetheless.
What do you mean by corrupt here?
By corrupt, you were saying that they're corrupt because it was their training and everything else was affecting their actions.
Yeah,
in
but
like
what
a
do you
negative
mean?
way.
What do you mean by corrupt here?
What I mean by corrupt is that their actions aren't being affected by, or their actions don't show that they're corrupt.
But that's
Because
not telling me what corrupt is. What is corrupt?
corrupt is being unlawful, not doing your duty correctly, doing a disservice to yourself and others around you. Like,
Right. So I would consider a police officer whose duty is to protect and serve the community, who goes and treats someone who's in a mental health crisis as a criminal, to be failing to do their duties to protect and serve them. That would be an example of corruption. Corrupt in the sense of failing to do their duties or failing to do their obligations or their responsibilities as a police officer. That's the corruption we're talking about. The belief creates the fact of their failure. That belief is part of the culture that is shared by police officers. So when we say all cops are bad, we're saying that. We're pointing at those beliefs that are creating the facts of the police failure. That's what's being evoked here.
yes. Okay. So, yeah, I can understand where you're getting at when you said they aren't, doing the duty of protecting the citizens because they're killing ones that are in a mental health crisis. Clearly, right? That was your claim,
Not
right?
just killing them, but beating them up, slamming them on the ground because they think they're a threat or something like that. The way that they're being treated is something that we would like. Imagine, if you will, you went to a mental institution, right? And you see someone in psychosis and they're hearing voices and they're resisting what the healthcare professionals are asking them to do. And now imagine that this person has guns drawn on them. All the healthcare professionals point a gun at them and yell at them to get on the ground. And this person in this mental health crisis doesn't understand what's happening, is incapable of understanding what's happening. And these healthcare professionals with guns pointing at them are getting mad because they're not being respected. And cops should be respected. That's one of the beliefs. Or healthcare professionals should be respected. That's one of the beliefs. They are an authority. An authority has the right to use force in a situation where someone's resisting arrest. Okay, so now the healthcare professionals put someone on the ground. They slam them on the ground, leaving bruises, breaking bones, having cuts. If we saw that happen in a mental health care situation, those people would be in jail for what they did. That would be considered abuse. Now, the only difference here is the context, where the person who is going to answer this call is given a certain training where they're told they're the authority, they're the enforcers of the law, they uphold the law. They have these beliefs that if someone's resisting arrest, now you're justified in being violent. And now that you're justified in being violent, you can go too far. And guess what? We'll protect you because we have this legal precedent called qualified immunity, where you won't go to jail. You won't be held accountable for going too far because you're justified. You're a police officer. These are the beliefs that are part of being a police officer that enable them to be violent to someone in a mental health crisis. If that happened in a mental health institution, as I said before, those people would be in jail for abuse. We have a double standard here. The community, the culture there is not just in the police force, but it's also in our society as a whole. When we say all cops are bad, we're pointing out that injustice and the beliefs that are supporting that injustice. We're pointing out the abuse that in other contexts we wouldn't say is justified.
All right. So, I think that goes more into the realm of corruption in the law system, right? In the courts and things like that. Because if you think about it, without the courts allowing, right, without the courts having that law go in effect, then they wouldn't be able to, you wouldn't be able to claim that the cops are being nearly as corrupt because they wouldn't be able to kill people without any consequences. They wouldn't be able to act, a certain way. So that doesn't go for corruption towards. I think that goes more for corruption towards you know, the law system, the Supreme Courts, the other courts, right? Rather than just the police system.
So you're right that the courts are doing that, right? But it's the beliefs that the police officers hold that they have that immunity. That is a belief in the police community that is supported by the justice system. And yes, the justice system has a responsibility here too. But that doesn't, just because the justice system has a responsibility, doesn't negate the idea that those beliefs are present in the police community itself. And that's what ACAB is pointing out. And also, the justice system is not the people on the ground brutalizing citizens. They have their own problems that they need to address, and we need to address those problems too. But judges aren't killing people in the street.
Yes, but you could argue, right? You could argue from a standpoint that there's a domino effect. Law gets passed and the people act differently in response to that law. For example, let's say people suddenly pass laws that you can't drink too much water in a day, right? People would naturally drink less water, meaning that it would put so much more into motion, right? Or they removed a law saying, "Oh, hey, assault, it's legal now," right? People would then assault each other more, obviously, right? So it's more of the law system's fault for not, for passing the law, because obviously people's actions are going to change in response to the law. That's natural. That's how everything should be. If people didn't change in response to the law, then there'd be no point in laws in the first place.
Wait, why would there be no laws in the first place?
I said there'd be no point in them. If nobody changed in response to laws, there'd be no point in laws in the first place. And I'm saying the police system, they're changing in response to the corruption in the court system. Because the corruption court system says, "Hey, you guys can go kill somebody. It's fine. We'll pardon you," right? And the cops, seeing that they're gonna change naturally, that they're gonna change according to what laws govern them, obviously. So it's more the court's fault than the police fault.
So you're saying that the people to blame are the justice system, and that the cops have no blame at all in this
I'm not saying
situation.
they have no blame at all, but
What's your claim then?
they have a small amount of blame.
Wait,
they
do you, so
significantly
you
less blame
think
in the courts.
you think that people who have their own beliefs, a community that has their own beliefs, are not to blame for the support of those beliefs because another part of their society allows them to have those beliefs? That's your view?
So that's a hard point to address. Certainly explains why you have 22 debate wins. Jesus Christ. Yeah, but I was just trying to clarify straight up that the cops. Okay, let's divide the blame. If it was into a pie, it would be like maybe 2/10 of the blame go to the cops, 5/10 go to the court system, and the rest are just put between other things. You know what I mean?
Wait, for
Like,
what? Blame for what?
blame for corruption. Blame for
Corruption of what?
corruption of morals, laws.
Of who? Of what community?
Corruption of just the law, the courts. No,
Right, but the police are a subset of the law. They're the enforcers. They're the instrument on the ground for the law. So there's going to be overlap in all these cases. But all ACAB is pointing out that the instrument is unjustified because it's corrupt.
see that there you go. You just call the cops an instrument of the law, right? An instrument is
Yeah,
meant to be
that's what
wielded.
a law enforcement is.
Yeah, instruments meant to be wielded and used, right? Now,
Yeah.
whenever someone gets hurt with an instrument, let's say someone gets hit with a bat, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is it the bat's fault for being there, or is the person who wielded the bat for using it? It's the same with the
The
courts.
person who used the bat. Now, in the police
Same with the
force,
courts.
the police are using the instrument. They're using the enforcement. They're using the violence.
Yeah, but they wouldn't have said instruments if it wasn't for the court. Because, like you just said, they are the enforcers. They are the instruments of the law system.
No, but
to make
that's
sure
look.
follows.
That's no. That's just something that would be true for anything about law enforcement. We can just go back to the state. There'd be no cops without a state. There'd be no Congress without a state. Of course, that's not saying anything meaningful here.
Saying that it's saying that the blame shouldn't be put mainly on cops, and that with the way we look at things as cops all or not cops all being corrupt, because as you said, ACAB is not about all cops exactly. But what we see about majority of cops or the comp system overall being corrupt is, blown far out of proportion, and that it's not mainly the cops' fault, or it's not mainly the police system's fault that they're, a little bit corrupt. It's the corruption coming from the top that's making them this way.
Yeah, but so ACAB isn't making a claim about who is responsible for all the terrible things that's happening in society. Like ACAB isn't saying only cops are bad. It's making a claim about the community that they're coming face to face with. So
And what community is that?
The police force. When people say ACAB, they're referring to the police force. So whenever someone makes a statement about a community, they're not making statements about other communities by that statement alone. Like, for example, if I say redheads have freckles, I'm not making a statement about blondes there. So when I make a statement about ACAB, I'm not making a statement about the Supreme Court or about Congress. I'm just making a statement about ACAB. And those things aren't mutually exclusive. I can say ACAB, and I can also say we need justice reform.
All right. So back to what you were saying about how when you're talking about one community, you're not talking about another. The thing is, whenever you call out a certain community, usually, whenever you're calling a problem in a community, you are majority pinning the blame on that community. Now, I mean, that's not always the case, but majority of the time it is. For example, let's say I said all firefighters are strong, or all firefighters are incompetent. I would be blaming the firefighters for not being able to do their job. I'm not saying anyone else behind was responsible. No, I'm talking about the firefighters. I'm talking about them specifically. So, so I would say it is indeed putting the blame on the cops.
Well, no,
Doesn't
that's not what I'm
necessarily,
negating. Of course they're blaming cops. They're trying to hold cops responsible for what they're doing.
and they aren't
But I'm
putting.
saying that by pointing out that the cops are responsible for what they're doing, that's not that the fact that the court system is supporting that has no negation of me demanding responsibility for the cops. The court system's guilty too.
Yeah, but the specific movement of ACAB isn't talking about the courts. It's talking about the cops, and I think and it's pinning its
Right, but it's not
blame.
excluding the court system.
It's not excluding, but it
Right.
doesn't directly include.
It doesn't have to.
Uh, I would say, considering it mentions cops by names, it certainly, certainly should, because
Why should it include the court system if it's mentioning cops by name?
if it's mentioning cops by names, trying to get rid of, or you know is trying to target the corruption of the law, and you know that
It's
they're trying
saying
to target corruption of the law, right?
it's
And
saying
law
that
enforcement.
cops are responsible. It's saying
Um,
cops are responsible for their morally repugnant acts and
um,
for the culture that supports the morally repugnant acts.
more than just cops are responsible. The
That
courts are
doesn't matter.
responsible as
That
well,
doesn't
but
matter. Of course, we're responsible. We're responsible for what's happening too.
yes, but it's not being brought up nearly as much as the cops. The cops are taking the vast majority of the, blame. Everyone's talking about, hey, the cops are doing this bad. The cops are, doing this and that. And yes, I agree. Maybe we should give them some flack. They deserve to take some blame. But at the same time, we're not putting any blame in the court system. We're not saying, hey, yo,
Yes,
the
we
court
are. Yes, we are.
already.
People who say ACAB do blame the court system. People who blame ACAB do blame society at large. People who are saying ACAB blame all of these things that we're saying.
But the specific movement is targeted at cops, correct?
It depends on what you mean by the specific movement. ACAB is a very broad movement that has existed for a long time and has been used by multiple movements. It's even been used by neo-Nazis. It's been used by anarchists. It's been used by communists. It's been used by football players who want to troll. It's such a broad term. It has many usages around the world. It started in England and it's crossed around the entire world. In the United States right now, in the context we are currently living in, it's being used to point out the authority of the police department, the police community being used in bad ways and how the community supports that bad usage.
That's that's fair. That's fair. But and point was that your point was that it's been used by many different movements, even neo Nazis. Like it's been used
Mm-hmm.
a lot, and that it has many different meanings. And right now, the meaning is supposed to be against the overall law system and the injustice going on. Right?
Well, ACAB is pointing out the cops.
Point out the cops
Yeah,
specifically.
there are other slogans that point out the justice system. For example, no justice, no peace. That's referring to like the court system as well. There are, there are different slogans to get at different things here.
Yes, but okay. So you said most of the people who support ACAB think that the law system deserves a reform, right?
Well, I think they do, and a lot of people that I see chanting ACAB do, but I don't remember making the claim that everyone thinks that there should be justice reform.
I didn't say everyone. I said most, but we'll go with what you said. That that some people want it.
Right, but
That,
wanting to reform, but let me just remind you, this is reforming the court system isn't really relevant to the proposition here, which was just about not all cops. You said not all cops are bad, and specifically not all white cops.
and then you said that ACAB isn't referring to all cops in a literal sense.
It's referring to the community.
Yeah,
It's
and
symbolic.
I'm pretty sure I already said that the community, once again, isn't all bad. There are certainly bad parts of it. There's certainly corruption going on.
Yeah,
But
you're saying when I'm talking about a community, what you said in your opening statement was community is made up of individuals. So when you say the community is all bad, you're actually saying all the individuals are bad. But that's not what is talked about when a community is invoked. It's like an entity by itself. It's a whole. The whole does not then mean all parts of the whole have the same beliefs individually. For example, you are Return of the Jester. You're made up of a bunch of small parts. But like the cells in your leg don't have your personality. The whole has the personality. All of those things working together inform the whole so that your personality comes out. But the individual parts aren't necessary. Like we don't talk about the cells in your leg having the personality you have. We talk about Return of the Jester having a personality. An entity, the Jester, has this personality. The entity of the police community, the whole, has these beliefs. Individuals partaking in the community would have a relation to those beliefs, would be supporting them, et cetera, et cetera. There would need to be some type of critical mass, some group involved for it to be the community view. So of course individuals are part of it, just like individual cells are part of your being. But the unity is what is being criticized. And so to take a statement that's criticizing the unity and then dial it down into the individuals would be like me trying to say something about your personality, but referring to the cells in your body rather than referring to you.
all right, so about the point that I'm referring to how they were all individual. All right, let's go ahead. I'll concede to you on that. That maybe they are. It maybe let's not talk about how if you talk about community, you're talking about everyone as an individual. Let's say I was wrong about that. Right now, if we go past that, right, then it's still when you talk about a community, you may not talk about every single individual, but you usually mean that that community, or you think that that community has the overall, perception of this, of whatever you're saying, or that this applies to the overall part of the community. So when you say all cops are bastards, not meaning that they are literally, bad people, but that they are corrupt, or the system is corrupt, or that the community is corrupt, because I don't want to, misrepresent you there. You are saying that the majority is corrupt. You are saying, or at the very least, the majority is corrupt.
No, it's not a majority thing. So there's a unity behind the notion of the community. A common unity, if we were to break down the word community, there's a unity there. So when you agree to partake in the community, you're agreeing to partake in the norms, the rules, the beliefs, the values of that community. Police officers are volunteering to take part in this community that has these values and rule following, one of which being like don't throw your fellow police officers under the bus for doing something wrong. Another one being that, like, because you can get away with going too far, go too far first and ask for forgiveness later. Those are things that you agree to partake in by signing up to be part of that unity.
I understand that. Okay, I understand what you're getting at, right? And I think that just because you're a cop doesn't mean you signed up to be a part of that unity. Because so people join things for their own separate reasons, right? And maybe they don't think of it the same way everyone else thinks of it. For example, ACAB was not nearly as popular 10 years back. Maybe even 5 years back wasn't nearly as popular. You know, people were still saying fuck the police. People still didn't like cops generally, but it wasn't nearly as popular. So I'm sure there were a lot of people thinking, oh, hey, the cops love them. I'm going to protect my community, etc., etc. So they signed up to protect their community. They didn't sign up because I want to be a part of a super racist community and I want to do this and that. And, you know,
Well, that's not my claim. My claim wasn't that people are signing up to be part of a racist community. The claim is that people are signing up to be part of a community, and that community has certain norms. And one of those norms would be something like don't rat on other police officers. That because you have this qualified immunity, you're allowed to push it too far and ask for forgiveness later, and you won't go to jail. So it's better that you act forcefully to make sure something bad doesn't happen than it is to let something bad happen and then feel guilty about it later or something like that. So I'm not saying that when they sign up to be cops that they want to be racist or something like that. I'm saying when they sign up to be cops, they're agreeing to the norms of being a cop, to being part of that community. And if you don't adhere to those norms, the community will push you out. It's very common. This happened with a police officer in LA, actually. He was a soldier. His name was Christopher Dorner. He was in the Navy. And then after being in the Navy, he joined the police department. And in the police department, he noticed that people in the LA police department, a police department famous for its brutality, by the way, especially for brutality against the Black community, he noticed that this brutality was occurring and he was telling on people. And then he got ostracized out of that police department. His appeals were they failed. He was terminated. And this kept going on for so long that eventually he wrote a manifesto and then killed police. So what he did at the end of it was terrible, but the point of his story is that he was part of this community and he did not adhere to the norms and he was silenced and pushed out of the community. So
yes,
even if
but
his motivations from the beginning were to protect and serve, because he was one of these patriots in the United States, he was in the military to protect and serve. When he got out of the military, he wanted to protect and serve his community. But his moral compass would not allow him to see these injustices happen. So when he spoke up and tried to do his duty as a patriot, as this citizen to protect and serve the community, he got booted. And then he did a terrible atrocity, which is unforgivable. And I'm not supporting that atrocity at all. I'm just pointing out that the norms of the community will push people out who are trying to follow their moral compass rather than the norms of that community.
all right. So, quick question. Before you join, right? Before you join a community, do you know the unspoken rules? Before you go to the hood, do you know all the unspoken rules? No?
Well,
Yeah.
you don't have to know all the unspoken rules.
But the point
That's
is
not
that
a
you
requirement.
before you join a community, you don't always know the unspoken rules. You don't always know the
Yeah, but you
climate
don't
that
have
surrounds
to.
them, right? You talk
You
to a
don't have
random
to.
person or you go talk to a random group of people, you won't know the social climate that they have going on between, those three people right?
Yeah, but that's not what the community is. The three people is not representative of the unity.
But I'm saying that you won't necessarily know straight up what the unspoken rules and what the, how you're supposed to act in every social climate. And so there
But
might be
hold
cops who
on,
are
not with cops. Not with cops. It is well known that cops are getting away with things. That's not a secret. That's not some unspoken rule.
so I'm sure that
That's
there's a
part. That's
basic
part of
rule.
society as a whole.
There's a basic rule: don't snitch. That goes from pretty much literally almost any group. Don't snitch, right? That's a rule is probably there. But what other social rules do you think the cops have right now? What can you guess?
I've been pointing them out this whole time.
Yeah, but like what actually?
What do you mean? This
Like,
entire debate, I've been
should
naming
you
several.
not
Like
do?
for example,
What are things they shouldn't do? Otherwise, they'll be socially
yeah,
ostracized. What are things they shouldn't do?
if someone fails to do their job as a cop and then act with police brutality, don't tell on them. That's one thing. We already went through the symmetry breaker first. That was like the first example we went through. The symmetry breaker between that and like in another community, because the responsibility protecting the community, and that's part of your duty to protect the community. But as a police officer, you're supposed to protect not police, but community at large. So when you fail to, that's the symmetry breaker. So not snitching there is forcing you to fail in your duties. That belief is corrupting you.
So you told me one unspoken rule that clearly that you fall in almost every context between almost every group of people.
Right, but you're not acknowledging the symmetry breaker I broke out.
Yes, there's symmetry break between
Right. So
different walks of life
going
and
back,
the gravity of not snitching and not telling on anyone who's committing police brutality, which could possibly end someone's life or something of the sort. Right?
Right. So
There's
going
a
going
fine
back,
difference between those two, but
those
at the same
norms. Hold
time,
on. Those norms are not the same because the motivations for them are different. The motivations being different breaks the analogy. So appealing to that same norm is to ignore the refutation I brought up against that. You're just repeating the claim and you're not addressing the criticism.
I'm not saying that they're on the same level. I didn't say that. I don't claim that. Of course, they're on different levels. Naturally.
Right. So what's the
All
mean? What is the substantive difference that leads you to think that appealing to the fact that all in-group out-groups have this rule of not snitching suddenly negates what I said?
I was using that as an example to show how every group has that as a rule, of course, but there's also rules you don't know when you join.
But that's not relevant.
It is to your example because I'm saying that you know not to snitch, obviously, but there's a ton of things you don't know. There might be a lot more corrupt things that are happening that you
But
don't
how
know
is
in the
that
police
relevant to ACAB?
because the cops that are joining, right? They're not joining to be a part of the social climate or contribute to that social climate or any of this sort and or anything like that. So I would say that cops, yeah. How does that apply to
Right.
ACAB?
But the motivations for joining a community does not address the views of the community. So pointing out that an individual who would have motivations that would be in contradiction with the community norms does not negate the community norms. It doesn't even address the community norms. ACAB is pointing out the community norms, showing that an individual would have motivations separate from the community norms, does not support your proposition. It does not negate what I'm saying ACAB means. All that's telling us is that some people would have good intentions to be a police officer. That's not in contention.
It is saying, though, that if you come into the police department with good, intentions, right, then you're probably going to stick to those good intentions and not, really conform to society right off the bat. So, and considering how many new police officers are coming out like every year, then I would say the community is pretty much somewhat not is
You're
somewhat
conflating the individuals with the community norms again. Just like the individual cells, the individual cells are not your personality.
But a certain amount of individuals can change a community norm. All right, when a community is
of course, you can change community norms, but that's not what's happening in this case. So it's not relevant. The point is that when someone joins the police community in our society today, they're adhering to these norms. And there would be people inside of it trying to fight it, but those people are silenced and fired and terminated. Those people are not adhering to the norms, so they're pushed out. And that is changing, and we're seeing that change, but the change is happening because the public demanded it. And they're demanding it because they see the community norms have these bad qualities. And when people say ACAB, that's what they're talking about.
All right. So the cop community is corrupt, is what you claim. That the overall.
What do you mean? So hold on. We might be using community. We might be using community different here.
Community, as in the the social norms, the culture, that is throughout the cops.
Yeah, it's a unity. And that unity, part of that unity is that these shared beliefs and the norms. It's a rule following. So when we point to individuals and they have these contradictions with the unity, that's not dispelling the unity having those qualities. You have to attack the unity.
All right. Yeah, but you know what? I concede. I give up. I'm not winning this.
Are you sure? Do you want to do a vote?
No, I'm not winning this. That's it.
Well, I appreciate the debate, Jester.
God.
I thought you did a good job. Don't beat yourself up.
The first debate I have is against a level 22 truck.
Well, Jester, you did some good things, so don't beat yourself up.
Yeah.
And I appreciate the conversation. I thought you were good faith the whole time.
Yeah, I was about to say that too. I thought you were very good faith, Jester. I'm looking forward to more debates that you have on the server. Thanks for doing this.
Honestly, I was expecting to be able to pull out some statistics and just flip like, yeah, and that didn't come. That did not happen. This went far off my plans.
Well, yeah, you could do a debate on the statistics. Like you could set up a proposition for that because you did a bunch of research for it. So I'm sure someone else might take it up.
Oh yeah, I definitely did some research. I went and looked through the CDC statistics, FBI statistics, all the way back as far as 4 years. So that was
nice. Yeah, that's good. It's good to do that for a debate. And yeah, once again, I want to thank you for the debate. I had a lot of fun.